welcome each and every one of you to this very special conversation with Margaret Enloe, Esquire, president and founder of Moving You Forward. And she is also a recovering lawyer. It's close to my heart, although I'm not sure if I'm quite recovering yet. We are so excited to bring all of these insights to our community at the fourth floor that Margaret's about to share. Before we dive in and I turn the stage over to her, just want to say a very brief word about the fourth floor. For those of you that don't know, we are a marketplace and we are matching startups and companies to board-ready women. We're doing this in an efficient way, in a cost-effective way. And our intent is to, yes, disrupt traditional recruiting processes, but also overcome the systemic barriers that just have kept women out of the board candidate pipeline. And also to bring value to companies because they have not been fully taking advantage of building out and leveraging their boards and certainly diverse boards, because that brings value to the company. So it's really strengthening both sides of the marketplace. We're also working to overcome systemic barriers that have kept women from getting funded and writing checks in our backroom investment club. So when you join us and you're a member, whether you are a company or you are an individual woman interested in sitting on boards or investing, that backroom investment club might be an option for you. So if you're an accredited investor, or if you're a company that's fundraising and it's an underrepresented founder, a woman or BIPOC-led startup, then that might be an option for you as well. So that's really the call to action to join if you're not already a member. We will drop a link in the chat, which is to our weekly platform tour. We do them every Monday at noon, 12 to 12:30. Really recommend that you come to a platform tour if you're interested and you want to figure out what kind of membership would make sense to you. So that's a great way to do it. You can also apply directly through our website as an individual, or if you are a company, you can in fact just purchase a membership through the website. So we'll put a link to the website in the chat as well. So, okay, enough about the fourth floor. Let's get to the point of today. So now, Margaret, I am thrilled to welcome you to the spotlight. Considering that we at the fourth floor are largely a community of women, board-ready women, women who invest, women who lead, and women who are building companies, and women and/or women who aspire to be one or more of these things, we are frequently discussing the disadvantages of being a woman in the professional world, because they do certainly exist. I think everyone in this call probably has experienced that. And most of us could tell a few stories on this subject. So I absolutely love that you are going to remind us of the advantages of being a woman in the professional world, because those exist too. But I think they tend to be underappreciated in male-dominant corporate environments, which shouldn't be a shocker. So Margaret, you are a professional certified coach and a speaker. You work with attorneys and you work with non-legal professionals to increase job satisfaction, enhance leadership performance, and improve business development and communication skills, facilitate transitions. You have had an extensive career in law, I think close to 30 years, both in-house and at firms before doing this. So just wanted to make sure everyone on this call gets that bit of your background as I introduce you. So now the stage is yours and we are excited to hear from you.
Great. Well, I'm going to do the thing that is the trickiest part of this whole presentation, and that is getting my slide deck set up. And I'm going to do that right now. It just takes a moment. I would ask you, while we're waiting for this just to load, if you would please maybe just put into the chat where you're dialing in from. Are you in, what city are you dialing in from? I think we have people that might be here as far away as Greece, and maybe people on the West Coast. So if you could just put that in, I'll see that in the chat later. Unfortunately, I right now can't see the chat. But Breen, thank you so much for that introduction. It's really a pleasure to be here today. And I'd just say good morning and good afternoon and good evening for all of you who are attending. I think as I was preparing for this talk, I ended up looking at a book that was right next to my bedside called The Women Who Made New York. And in there, there are many short vignettes of women, many of whom we've never heard of before. but one of them was a Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, and she was the first MD in the United States. And for years, she didn't have any patients. She lived in abject poverty. She was born over 200 years ago. She died in 1910. And eventually she did achieve a lot of success. I'd like to think that if Dr. Blackwell were here today, hearing that we're talking about the advantages of being a professional woman, and I am going to touch on some disadvantages, that she would say, wow, we've come a long way. Obviously, there's a lot more that we need to travel. So Breen, as you said, yes, I'm going to talk about some of the advantages. I'm going to touch on those, some of the disadvantages of being a woman in the professional world, but also how we can get around those. And whether you're in a career right now, this time of your life, or maybe you're traveling, you're gardening, you're taking care of a loved one or children, I hope these comments will be useful to you. And if just one or two things that I say resonate with you and you decide to take them forward, play with them a bit, this talk, in my view, will be worthwhile. So my hope as well is that by raising your self-awareness of some of the issues we as women deal with, you can move forward a little more gracefully, past the disadvantages, and take full ownership of your many advantages. You know, there are things over which we have agency, things that we ourselves can do something about. And some of the systemic issues like the gender pay gap that Breen, you didn't refer to that, but that's, I know, part of what you're dealing with. It's improving, but it's nowhere where it should be. But I'm going to be talking primarily about things that we ourselves can do something about today. I'm going to have a few polls, in fact, 5, and from time to time, I'm going to ask you to put some information into the chat. Please participate, and if you can, participate fairly promptly. And feel free to add or embellish. And as Breen said, they're going to be monitoring the chat. I don't have visibility on that right now. And if they feel there's a question you're asking that they want to interrupt me, then they will interrupt me. There's going to be time for Q&A at the end. So I hope it's okay with everybody, but I'm going to start with some of the disadvantages and that women face and make a few recommendations about dealing with them. Then I'm going to focus on some specific advantages and that we really should be more mindful of. And again, the focus is going to be on areas where we have agency. And please keep in mind that there are no absolutes here. I may describe a trait or a tendency of women and you say, well, that's not me. I mean, some of these things I feel don't apply to me per se. And that's fine. These are tendencies which my experience and research support. But my comments are not ever to suggest that I'm accurately describing everyone. So what are some of the disadvantages? Well, yes, we know we have some. And again, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but physical stature is one. Malcolm Gladwell in his book, Blink, talks about how we, both men and women, are prejudiced in favor of tall people, and how among his CEO sample, 30% were 6'2" and taller. So I wonder, how many women do you know who are 6'2" and taller? Probably not too many. So how do we get around that? Well, we can wear high heels, but beyond that, there's not a whole lot we can do. And what about our age? Well, we can't change our age. Men can't change their age. I think at some level, we feel as women, they have an easier time dealing with getting older. And I think that's right until maybe age 50. But our voices are something that we generally as women have higher voices. And why is that? Because our vocal cords as women are smaller. So let me just see how this sounds to you. Hello, my name is Margaret Enloe. I'm an executive coach, and I'm very pleased to be here today. Alternatively, I said to you, hello, my name is Margaret Enloe. I'm an executive coach, and I'm pleased to be here today. Lower tones command more respect, and people with them, guess what, are perceived as more competent. And think of television commercials. It's rare to hear a person. It's rare to hear a person promoting a product with a high pitch. So I talked about physical stature, age. We can sort of do some things about our age. Best thing is to have a good attitude about it. And our voice, which is what I'm talking about right now. Margaret Thatcher. I'm sure many of you, most of you, all of you know her, former Prime Minister of the UK. She changed from a higher pitch to a deep and huskier tone as part of her image makeover to appear more authoritative and assertive. And it was a key factor in her political success. It helped her to establish herself as a strong and decisive leader. And research shows that women find deep male voices attractive and high male voices seldom, if ever, are considered seductive. So does that surprise anyone? And I don't think so, but whether it's true or not, women generally have higher voices than men, but whatever the size of your vocal cords, you can speak in a high voice or you can speak in a lower register. We're not talking about being inauthentic here. You may remember and know Elizabeth Holmes, who was the CEO of Theranos. She had a very deep voice and everybody wondered if that was authentic. Turned out it was not authentic. She's serving an 11-year prison sentence, not because of her deep voice, but because of fraud. I'll just end here on this point about our voices. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, an American poet. I'm sure many of you know about him. He's an educator. He lived in the 1800s. He said this about the human voice. He said, the human voice is the organ of the soul. So all I would add is, please pay attention to your voice. Another disadvantage, and Breen, I hope you'll bear with me as I just go through some of these. Women tend to be team players, but less likely to take the spotlight or trumpet their successes. And I'm going to have poll number 1, asking you some questions about how you feel about this question of being team players. So Breen, if you could launch poll number 1, that'd be great. Whoa. Okay. Okay, you can.
Can you see the results there, Margaret?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
So I'm sharing the results. People can see it. Can people see it? Agree. 24 out of 24. 100% of you agree with that. So that's really pretty remarkable. And I would just say this is an issue that comes up a lot in my coaching. And it's compounded, the fact that women are team players, which is a good thing, but the issue is compounded by the fact that women more often than men tend to be people pleasers. I hear this a lot in my coaching. And a quick tip on that, if someone compliments you on a job well done, say thank you. And maybe something like, it took a lot of hard work and I'm pleased with what I accomplished. Or I'm pleased with the results versus, well, really, it was a team effort and I couldn't have done it without Tom and Jackie. If you've worked on something and you've done a good job and you know you've put in the effort and somebody talks about it, you don't need to say a we kind of answer when maybe a we and I, maybe, sorry, reverse that, an I and we response is just as appropriate. So another thing, talk about being a team player, is less confidence. And this is a biggie. And why do I say that? Because lots of studies show that women, not by and large, that women are less confident than men. There's lots of studies that confirm that. Not less competent, but less confident. And if this sort of lack of confidence wasn't bad enough, studies also show that confidence actually counts more than competence in terms of success in people's careers. So being confident is a good thing. But how does that lack of confidence translate into our professional lives? Well, it affects a number of things. It affects how we feel, including our enjoyment of work, our feelings of autonomy. It affects how we act, how assertive we are, how we seize opportunities and face risks. And it affects relationships. How willing are we to engage with people who are more senior? Maybe people who are in a different department than we are, people who have more experience. And it also affects how we communicate. For example, we don't speak up as much. We don't speak up as much, or when we do, we don't feel it's taken as seriously as when a man says it. And at mixed meetings, men speak up more than women and interrupt more often? I'm going to have poll number 2. We don't speak up as much. And Breen, if you could launch that, I'd appreciate it. Okay. There's a few more responses in here. Again, if you see a poll and you're participating, I'd love for you to participate. It takes like 2 seconds, maybe a little bit more than 2 seconds, but okay. So yeah, we get most people have participated now. So here's a different result. I have this experience all the time. 30% are saying that. Well, let me end the poll and share the results. Hopefully you can all see this. I have this experience all the time, 29%. I sometimes have this experience, 64%. I rarely have this experience, 4%. I don't go to meetings with men, 4%. So I hope you saw that. And it's it's a mix. It's nice to see that people don't have it a lot of people don't have it all the time. But even at the highest levels of organizations, many otherwise dynamic women struggle in meetings. And some say their voices are drowned out. Others can't find a way into the conversation. And if you wait for the perfect time to say the perfect thing, it likely will be said by someone else first, and often by a male. And it's annoying. More than that, it gets in the way of what? Our being a player or being perceived as a player in our career. So if you're interested in this topic of men and women speaking at meetings and what happens, there's a book by a man named it's called Mansplaining. I think we all know what that is. Manterrupting and Bro-Procreating, Gender Bias and the Pervasive Interruption of Women. I'm going to, when this is over, I'm going to provide to Fourth Floor a slide deck, and it will include these books that I mentioned. So no need to write them all down right now. So we don't speak up as much. What else do? We apologize frequently. Men are taught to apologize for their weaknesses and women for their strengths. See if you hear yourself apologizing. Try to be somewhat intentional and curious about whether you do it or not. And you might ask a friend or colleague. If you have that tendency, all I'm suggesting is be aware of it as much as possible. Try to catch yourself in the act, and then just work on not doing it or reducing the number of times you automatically apologize. It's not necessarily easy, but it's something to be aware of, something over which you can pay attention to, or ask somebody to help you pay attention to that. The third thing, we use qualifiers. And I'd love for you to put in the chat if you feel you use qualifiers. Here are some. I just want to say, I haven't studied this fully, but this may be only how I feel. I may not be right, but just put in the chat. Do you hear yourself when I say that using qualifiers? And again, it's something to be aware of, to pay attention to, and to try to reduce it once you're aware of it. So I'm going to move on to just some tips. If your confidence is low, some might say, if you're not confident, fake it. And there was an article in the New York Times a while ago about how men fake long work hours. It was titled, How Some Men Fake an 80-Hour Work Week and Why It Matters. And there's clearly some controversy over this idea of faking confidence because it suggests acting in some way that's not authentic. But another way to think about it is park your nerves. Put them on the sideline for a while. Talk to your nerves or your anxiety as if they were a person. You might say, get away, Joan, go in the closet, just get away. It's kind of a mindfulness practice, but if you kind of give this quality of your nerves or your anxious a name, anxiety, a bit of a name, it's easier to talk to and just say, get away. And another thing that, of course, helps in parking your nerves is preparation. You probably know Arthur Ashe, famous tennis player, and he said, One of the keys to success is confidence, and one of the keys to confidence is preparation. So, second tip, forget perfection. It is highly overrated. And I'm sure you've all heard this before. Oh, you've all heard this before. And it's something that, well, what do we do instead? Well, do we strive for something bad? No, we strive for doing your best, but not perfection, which becomes a barrier to moving forward with something you want to do or try. And you've heard about the importance of learning from our mistakes. Well, we make them all the time, all the time. Eleanor Roosevelt knew this when she said, I love this quote, learn from your mistakes, learn from the mistakes of others. You can't live long enough to make them all yourself. So the point being, if we're making mistakes all the time, perhaps every day, we know we can't be perfect. So forget perfection. Third thing is master the pre-meeting. What do I mean? I mean, get to meetings 5 minutes early. 5 to 10 minutes early, even better. So you can shoot the breeze and hear what others are saying as they arrive. Research. So is that hard? Yeah. If for women, it tends to be. And research shows that female executives are very efficient. Good thing, right? They come to meetings on time. They leave as soon as the last agenda item is covered. They go back to their office and put out fires if they have an office, or they go to their next virtual meeting and put out a fire. So I'd love if you would just put in the chat if that quality describes you. In other words, you like to be efficient, you like checking things off your to-do list. And while you're putting that in the chat, I'll just say men are more likely to spend time connecting with one another to test earlier before the meeting starts, to test their ideas and garner support. They arrive at meetings early to get a good seat, to chat. They stay afterwards to close off the discussion, and they talk about other issues on their minds. So mastering the meetings before the meetings or the meetings after the meetings is a good idea. It's where a lot of the real work happens. So come early, not just in time. It may feel like a lot of pressure to change a little bit of that habit, but somebody said, I think it was an athlete, pressure is the shadow of a good opportunity. The next thing I'll mention is make your language more muscular. What do I mean? Well, use active words and authoritative statements. Take ownership of your opinions and build on others instead of just agreeing with them. Here's a chart that shows the difference between, on the left, what people might be inclined to say, and what on the right was a better thing to say. And you may not agree with all of these statements, but it's something that I'm talking about when I talk about more muscular language. And there are other phrases that project confidence, such as, I wouldn't worry about it, or doing it this way works for me. I need to say something. Some other clauses that you might say, yeah, maybe I could use those a little more often. Even the phrase, can you help me, is a sign of confidence because it shows you're confident to ask for help. You're much more interested in improving something, learning something, and much less in what others are going to think of you. So interestingly, in interviews and written comments, men acknowledge that women often struggle to make themselves heard at meetings, but they don't always agree with their female peers about the reasons. And here in this chart, I just want you to be aware of this dynamic between the he said, and she said. For example, we're afraid of how women will react to criticism. Well, she says, we don't get feedback, even when we ask for it. Women get defensive when they are challenged. Woman says, well, we obsess about a meeting for days after it's over. How about the last one? Man says, women are more emotional than men. Maybe that's true, but she says, it's not emotion, it's passion. So it's passion, sorry. So I put up this slide to remind you that what you feel about something may not and probably isn't how a man thinks about it. And to the extent you can raise your confidence or at least project more of it, some of these problems, some of the he said, she said issues will diminish and your influence, your energy and effectiveness will increase. And last thing I'm going to mention here is fight the imposter syndrome. And if you feel the victim of the imposter syndrome, take note of it. what is the imposter syndrome? I think a lot of you have an intuitive understanding of it for sure. But you chalk your success up to luck, timing, or something else like a computer error. My son, when he got into college, he said, I think that was a computer error. So this is not something that just affects women. And second, when you succeed, you secretly feel you fooled people again, and it's only a matter of time before you're found out. So I'd love to launch poll number 3. Poll number 3 is about the imposter syndrome and how you've been impacted or not by it. If there are any men participating in this talk today, you certainly should feel free to weigh in on this poll. It might skew it another way, but men, women, and children are affected by the imposter syndrome. It's not something endemic to just women. Okay, so we have quite a few people participating. I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Never, 17%, sometimes 52%, often 17%, all the time 14%. So not a surprising result in my view, but it does show that a lot of you participating have, in the past 3 years, which is the beginning, how often have you felt it? Well, sometimes and often and all the time, you add up those 3 percentages and you've got quite, a lot of people feeling the imposter syndrome. So one thing which hopefully you know is that you are not alone. Lots of famous people have been affected by it. Lots of high achievers. You can just go onto the internet and say imposter syndrome and you'll get lots of people, but here are some of them. I think you all know these people on the left, and here are some more people you know on the right. And it's just a small sample. So remember that the syndrome keeps people just like you, like me, like all of us from speaking up and exuding confidence. And if it often crops up when we're faced with a challenge. And professionals who have a solid track record for accomplishments, many lawyers I've worked with, can feel terror when given a new assignment. How about it's taking their first deposition, handling their first trial? There are many other examples like that. And a good book on this is Secret Thoughts of Successful Women: Why Capable People Suffer from the Imposter Syndrome and How to Thrive in Spite of It. And as our confidence ebbs and flows, so does our effectiveness. In my current work as a coach, I spend a fair amount of time with women talking about this issue. And why is that? Because lack of confidence affects a lot of women and men, but it's not something you can casually talk about. Have you ever heard someone say in response to a question you ask them, so how are you doing? Somebody responding, well, actually, I'm not feeling so confident today. I mean, in my total years of experience, I've never heard anybody respond to a question, I'm not so feeling confident today. So if you don't feel as confident as you'd like, take some comfort, misery loves company, that in the fact that many around you don't either, including successful people. And a wonderful book on the impact of confidence on women, some of you may have read it before, is The Confidence Code. The Confidence Code, it came out a few years ago. And my father would say, we're all 95% water. He did that to buck up his confidence in a job where he had to talk to a lot of CEOs and UN ambassadors about difficult subjects. And it was intimidating, not that he ever admitted that. And while my father's comment about our all being 95% water is a slight exaggeration, actually it's around, the average is around 60%. That's still quite a lot. This concept has helped me with my confidence over the years, and I commend it to you. So I talked a little bit about disadvantages, and I said I'd talk about advantages, and again, where you have agency. So what are some of the So I would say there are some disadvantages, but from the get-go, as Breen said, we have advantages, and you can and should know what they are and use them to the max. Max out on them, embrace them in succeeding at work, engaging with people, maybe in building a business, maybe expanding your entrepreneurial endeavors, and by all means, to inspire and influence others no matter what you're doing. So what are these advantages? What are they? I asked a good friend this question a few weeks ago, and she said, well, being a woman, this harkens back to Breen, what you were talking about, and a lot of what Fourth Floor is all about. It provides a level of diversity to whatever environment you're operating in. White males do not have that advantage. And another friend who was a bit of a fashionista, she said, well, women get to wear pants and dresses, no questions asked. They can be more distinctive in their attire, more out there with colors, flair, and style. And some people who really like fashion, that's a very meaningful thing to them. They're not constrained by, oh, I got to wear some polo shirt or really dull tie, dull suit to this event. Yeah, we can do more. For people who don't care as much about clothing, it's like maybe a so what. But another, and you all will have your perspective on that. Another friend said, though, that women tend to be better organized, that better at multitasking, better at time management. And I have poll number 4. I'd love, Breen, for you to launch, because I'd love to know whether you agree with that statement based on your own experience at work and or in your personal lives. Okay, let's let a few more people respond here. Quick answer to this poll for those of you who haven't weighed in yet. Love to see what you have to think. What you think. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll there and share these results. Yes, I completely agree, 46%. Nobody disagrees, interestingly. There are 43% of you who are neutral, sometimes yes and sometimes no, and some of you are undecided. So very interesting results there. It's almost, yeah, sometimes yes and sometimes no. And an equally large group, almost a little bit bigger, say, I completely agree with that. So very helpful to see. I guess in my own experience, I'm not sure how many men would manage doing in lots of respects what women do. And again, this is from my personal experience and what clients have said to me. But just remember, for those, there's a negative corollary to always being able to juggle and do a lot, being very efficient, getting things done. It means that women get asked to do more, or women do it voluntarily. And there's a book out on this right now called The No Club. And a lot of people have difficulty saying no, putting a stop to women's dead end work. And so just be aware that when and if you raise your hand or volunteer for something, ask yourself, is it a task that anyone could do? Will you learn something from it? Will it be evaluated for promotional purposes? If the answer to all of those is, yeah, anyone could do it, or no, I don't think I'll learn, I'm just volunteering, then I would just ask you to pause and think, do I really want to volunteer for that? But putting aside that issue of being more efficient, the tendency to, when volunteering, the tendency to be better organized than men may be more efficient, to keep more balls in the air, has its advantages, which we can and do draw on frequently. So some other advantages. And again, this is based on personal experience as well as research. But the first one I'm going to put up here is women are more socially connected and have more friends. And in one study, they found that more than half of workers, this is men and women, made a close friend at work or through a partner or spouse, I'm going to turn off the air conditioner here. Okay, hopefully that sounds better. But it's women who truly excel in building connections at work. College-educated women are much more likely than, interesting, college-educated men to have a close friend where they work, and they are far more likely to confide in their coworkers as well. And you might say, well, why is that good? What does that matter? What benefits are associated with that? Well, research shows that people who establish close relationships where they work are generally happier, more engaged, and less apt to be looking for other employment opportunities. Dale Carnegie, who wrote his very famous best-selling book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, this book that I would imagine some of you have read or looked at. Anyway, what would he say? He'd say that knowing how to make friends is pretty much all you need to be successful. So I'd love for you to just put in the chat, we're not going to pause, just put in the chat, do you agree that for the most part, women are more socially connected than men? Do they have an easier time making friends? And again, I'm sure there's some of you who will disagree with that, which is totally good. But I'll just say, for those of you who are saying yes or believe it, you'll be happy to hear that a study was released revealing that strong social connections can improve health and increase longevity. I believe many of you have probably heard that before. And friendships are just as important, this is hard to believe, to overall quality of life as choosing not to smoke, eating healthy foods, and getting enough sleep every night. And they found that the researchers found that people who had satisfying relationships with others were happier, better adjusted, had fewer health problems, and indeed lived longer. So just something, if women by and large have an easier time of being socially connected, making friends, that's a real advantage now and in the future. What's another one? We're better listeners. Or maybe that's women tend to understand the emotional parts of messages more effectively than men. And why is that? Well, research again indicates that women process messages on both sides of the brain, more so than men. And let me show you a slide. Men tend to process more on the left side of the brain, whereas emotional information is processed on the right side of the brain. And you can look at these two halves. And how does that translate into listening? Well, men are more likely to be what they call action-oriented listeners, which means they focus on listening to information pertinent to the task at hand. Action-oriented listeners have little patience for speakers who go off topic or include unnecessary details. Women, on the other hand, are more likely to be people-oriented listeners. They connect with the emotional messages and undertones of a conversation. But irrespective of gender, studies show that people spend most of their listening time thinking about what they're going to say. What is my response going to be? And self-awareness about how well we listen is low. I've had clients, I had one where I asked her a question and she took the next 50 minutes to answer that question. It was all very interesting information, but it was so out of tune with just answering what I viewed as a fairly simple question to get some dialogue going. So self-awareness can be low, and let's face it, many of us get distracted. We look at our cell phones. I'd love to think that none of you were looking at your cell phones right now, but I'd be in la la land, right? I'd be in la la land if I thought that were true. So please keep in mind that listening is a top leadership skill. And one man we all know who is known to be a great listener. And if anyone wants to guess, I'll give you some hints. You can put it in the chat. Again, I told you it was a man, a former, now deceased president of the United States. And he had lots of distractions. So it was Abraham Lincoln. In fact, in the movie Lincoln, which came out in 2012 with Daniel Day-Lewis and Sally Field, the first few minutes of that movie, I still remember it. If you recall, Lincoln asking some soldiers at nighttime what their experience had been in the battle, and he's listening intently to their answers. And putting aside these distractions we all cope with, as people rise in the ranks, what happens? They tend to do more talking and less listening. So my question to you is, are you a good listener? Is your doctor, your lawyer, if you have one, your colleague, is your colleague a good listener? Maybe your spouse. And maybe yes, maybe no, maybe sometimes. I'm just going to suggest that you ask a close colleague or a loved one if they think you're a good listener, and make it safe for them to give you an honest answer. And they may say, well, yes, sometimes you are, and no, sometimes you're not. But if they say no, then practice with a colleague. Listen to them without interrupting for a full minute. It sounds easy, but it's not. And no matter how hard it may be for you, the women on this call, I promise you it's harder for the men than the women. Another advantage that I feel very strongly we have is that women are more collaborative in their leadership style. We want all the boats to float, right? It's rapport versus report. So one example, some of you may have read about this. It was in the Washington Post in the Obama White House. The female staffers felt that their contributions at meetings were being overlooked, and they came up together collectively with a strategy to make sure their voices were heard. And when a woman made a key point, other women agreed they would repeat it, giving credit, avoiding the appropriation that might have been going on, giving credit to its original author, the woman. And that forced the men in the room, including Obama, to recognize the contribution, where it originally came from. And one staffer said, we just started doing it and made a purpose of doing it. It was an everyday thing, practice. And she said Obama noticed and began calling more often on the women and junior aides. So again, that's something that the group collectively did together. My point here is that making friends, collaborating, listening with both sides of the brain create bonds, which create new relationships and make existing ones even stronger. And relationships are important key to our success, to building a business, to getting new clients, to getting funding for a nonprofit, and to our enjoyment at work. And women generally have an easier time at developing than men, creating these, collaborating with others. My husband even said, this is some years ago, we went on a ski vacation with 4 moms. I was one of them, and 7 children under 7. That was a lot of effort. And he noticed that everyone got along. Everyone easily shared the responsibilities of getting the kids fed, dressed, onto the slopes, in lessons, entertained, and later in the night into bed. He said, my husband, I remember this very, very clearly. He said, this would never happen with a group of dads. There's just no way this would have worked. So again, it's to emphasize the collaboration that women, I think, more naturally undertake than men. Fourth thing that I will point out is that I believe women are more engaged in learning than men. And take a quick example, let's say, of a book club. Many of you may be part of a book club, but if you asked a group of men and women whether they wanted to be in one, we'll talk about some really interesting topics, political science, fiction, nonfiction. How many think there would be equal participation by men and women? And since 1986 until now, interestingly, there have been consistently more women than men enrolled in master's programs. And from 2005 until the present day, there are more women than men in doctorate programs. And putting aside this formal education statistics, a recent study found that women in many fields appear to be ready to take the lead in boosting their job skills. It's a key finding of something LinkedIn did. It's called LinkedIn's Workforce Confidence Survey. And most men and women say they plan to focus on learning new skills over the next 6 months rather than changing jobs. But the survey found that the level of interest for women was 5 percentage points above men's. So, learning is, let me just mention that Toastmasters, and many of you may know Toastmasters, they've noticed that women by significant margin are emerging as the most active participants in their program. And so what's the importance and impact of being more naturally inclined or willing to learn new things? I think personally, the answer is pretty obvious, but I like this quote from a man named Alvin Toffler. He was an American writer, futurist, and businessman who said this: the illiterate of the 21st century will be not those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. So I'd love to know, again, just jot it in the chat, I'd love to know whether you agree with this concept that women are more naturally engaged in learning compared to men. Just, if you don't mind, put that in the chat. And then the last thing I want to focus on here is women and social skills. Do women have better social skills? Are women more emotionally intelligent than men? And what is EQ? What is EQ? Short for emotional intelligence. Well, EQ is a set of emotional and social skills that collectively establish how well we perceive and express ourselves, develop and maintain social relationships, cope with challenges, manage stress, and make decisions, use emotional information in an effective and meaningful way. So I want to bring poll number 5 on emotional intelligence. How many of you think that women are more emotionally intelligent than men? I want to get 90% participation this time. It's the last poll, folks. Okay. All right. We'll stop there. And thank you. So I agree. I agree. Do you, with the statement, women are more emotionally intelligent than men? I agree, 57%. I disagree, 0%. It depends, sometimes yes and sometimes no. All right. Nobody answered, I have no idea. Okay. So hopefully you can all see that. I will let you know that interestingly, studies show that men and women are equal in their overall EQ, but men and women possess different EQ strengths that are considered gender specific. And in general, women tend to score higher than men in areas of empathy, interpersonal relationships, and social responsibility. Men tend to score higher than women in areas of assertiveness, stress tolerance, and self-regard, which is another way of talking about confidence. So I'm not sure, it's like there's this gender divide, and I might say, why this gender divide? Well, maybe part of the answer is because boys and girls are socialized very early. Well, boys, they're differently. Boys and girls are socialized differently. And boys, very early on, are socialized to be more competitive, more confident, more assertive, and even sometimes aggressive. It's a sign of strength. Girls receive very different messages, studies show, in their childhoods. How many of you have watched kids on a playground? I have 3 children. I watched a lot of kids on the playground over the years. And the boys, if they're pushing and shoving a bit, get left alone much more often. Boys will be boys is a familiar refrain. If the girls start up behavior, pretty quickly a caregiver or parent steps in to say something like, this isn't the way to behave. This is your good friend so-and-so. And in one study on the playground, the researcher observed children coming down a fire pole. And he looked at the parents, how they responded and treated the boys and girls sliding down that pole. And he said, boys effectively were told, you can do it. Girls were told, watch out, be careful. So what does this gender divide in EQ mean? Well, maybe your answer depends on what you value. Maybe it depends on the issues at stake. And we had huge issues at stake during COVID. And a study found women are better leaders, especially in a time of crisis. And you may recall that female heads of state were widely praised for their handling of COVID-19. For example, most countries led by women had lower death rates. I think we go like that. That's great, right? Than countries led by men. Why is that? Well, studies suggest that female political leaders coped with the pandemic differently and often better than the men. They analyzed 122 speeches, And it showed what? That men used war analogies and fear-based tactics more often in their speeches. In contrast, women like Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand and Angela Merkel in Germany, and other female leaders in the Scandinavian countries and Iceland and Taiwan, they focused on what? Families, children, and vulnerable groups with messages of compassion and social cohesion. And then there's a US analysis, even indicated states with female governors had fewer COVID-related deaths than those with male governors. And in this connection, you may have seen in the New York Times article this past Sunday, I'm not trying to get political here, but it's like right in Sunday's paper, reporting that Governor DeSantis's approach to dealing with COVID, something that he touts as a positive on the campaign trail, actually had led to a steep cost in terms of those who died in Florida during the Delta wave in the mid-2021. So putting aside state governors and foreign leaders, other reviews were submitted during the pandemic, and women outscored men on a majority of leadership competencies, including taking initiative, demonstrating learning agility, inspiring and motivating others, developing others, and building relationships. So kind of a wonderful thing. So maybe it had to do with leadership style or women's teamwork and collaboration, both of which came easier to women. So these traits, call them tendencies that come more naturally to women than men, are qualities that serve us and those around us well. And it seems they are particularly helpful during a crisis. So I'm going to end with a quote from Judith Kaye, who was the former Chief Justice of the New York Court of Appeals. And as all lawyers on this call probably know, the New York Court of Appeals is New York State's highest judicial court. And she served on that court for longer than any man preceding her. She died in 2016, but both as a jurist and as a judicial administrator, her pursuit of new ideas and solutions to difficult problems were recognized across the country. And for those of you who have served or been called for jury duty in New York State, you should know that it was Justice Kaye, the jurist, who successfully pushed to eliminate all exemptions from jury service. So many people who got automatic exemptions all of a sudden got pulled in to serve in their jury, serve on juries, which is a much, much better system. So what is her quote? Here it is. I'll read it. I most enjoy hearing other women talk of their journey up the trail, jiggling and juggling, finding the ways around whatever age you might be are the most satisfactory and inspiring. No point just being negative. It's so easy to do that. How do we keep the flame alive, light the path for our own continuing journey and for those who follow us? I thought that was a nice quote from her. I did get to know her some. She made time for me. I networked with her. I reached out to her. We had lunch twice together. And it did occur to me, how does this woman, this very famous woman, have time for somebody like me? But just by calling her and saying, would you have time for lunch? She said yes. It's a great example of reaching out, speaking up, being a little bold. So I know it's time has run here, but with the time remaining, we're going to open this up to Q&A.
And I just want to let you know, Margaret, while the chat has been very lively, it's not really questions per se. It's a whole lot of commentary on many of the points that you made. And, also people acknowledging, people having related insights that they're sharing in the chat.
Oh, that's great.
So just wanted to let you know that. And, and we do have 2 minutes remaining. So if anybody has a burning question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask Margaret.
I did see one comment that led me to have a question. So I think I'll start off the Q&A with someone mentioned, to your point about women showing up earlier to meetings, to network, or staying late to talk about, whatever else is on their mind. Do you have a tip or any recommendations for how we do that in the virtual world as we, have all these meetings on Zoom now?
Yeah, I was thinking about that as I was uh, thinking about that topic. And yeah, a lot more is in the virtual world. And two things. One, try not to be just entering the Zoom call right at the time it's supposed to start. Come in 3 minutes early, hang out. There might be one or two people who do the same thing, and then you can have an impromptu conversation with them. And the second thing is, for the women, I've advised women to be a little more up on sports. And it kind of falls in a bad way for some women, but it's a very easy way to get a conversation going. So again, my main thing would be just tune into a Zoom call, block your calendar out for like 5 minutes before it's supposed to call, tune in at least 3 minutes earlier. And then at the end of the meeting, you might say, you could send a chat, say, hey, John, could you hang out a few more minutes so we can talk? Or could we have a sidebar after this Zoom is over? So that's something that we can do now in a way more easily than we did before.